Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology, and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com. Hello and welcome to SciTech Culture, the show where we discuss science, technology, and culture in its myriad of forms. My name is Ben Warner, and I'm joined once again by my good friend and colleague Steve Kern on a much lovelier day today in winter. How are we today, Steve?
I'm good, thanks, Ben. It's certainly a lot warmer where I am today than it was last week, I think. So.
Yeah, and on this end too, which is always good. So just before we launch into our topic for today, just wanted to touch on something we discussed in our last episode to do with Pokemon Go and Nintendo. And just to clarify that Nintendo did come out later and say that they didn't do as well as what people expected. There were some initial stories of their stock price going up and all sorts of things, but it turns out the effect wasn't as pronounced as what it was. But I still think, like we were saying before we got on, that I can't believe that Nintendo is not sitting there looking at what's going on with Pokemon Go and not coming up with the Mario Brothers version of it.
There'll be plenty of opportunities for them now, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we're going to be talking about first-class air travel, which is, if that's the way you're going to do it, that's the way you should do it.
It's the only way to fly.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw an article in The Age today, and it was about in-flight bars of the past. And this is our starting point, is just sort of traveling back. We're going to talk about how accessible and affordable air travel has become. And I thought in context, it would be good to bring this part of it up in looking back at how the affluent used to travel in their old in some very old planes, and some photos from the 60s and 70s and before that they had there. And it's really amazing. One of my favourites though was the Qantas Empire class flying boat, which could only accommodate 16 passengers on a leisurely 4-day trip to Singapore. Well, it would have to be leisurely if it's going to take 4 days to get to Singapore from Australia.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's you can imagine flying like that, though. I mean, the altitudes they were flying were much lower, and really they didn't have the huge fuel loads or the power or the speed of those planes. So it's quite remarkable.
But the interesting thing was the amount of space they devoted to, per passenger. If you were to look at that, it was, it almost looked like a flying hotel almost in a way, with, special dining areas, bar areas, and then even the seating areas were very luxurious. And that's kind of carried on to the modern world where, a first class seat's got like a lot of room per passenger, so as it is. But it's just fascinating, isn't it? I loved also the a couple of shots I've got there of some 60s and 70s bars that were set up in like the early 747s and things like that. That was pretty amazing.
Well, I mean, that was the concept. It was glamorous. It was for the wealthy, and it was exciting. Back in those days, all the planes were the polished silver and that sort of stuff. Looked great. But actually, the jumbo jet changed all of that. And once they realised they could cram 400 people on a plane and only charge them a little bit less money,
yeah,
that's where it all changed.
Pan Am was an early pioneer of a lot of this stuff, and I'm not just saying that just from my knowledge of having watched The Aviator or anything like that, but they did a lot of work around this, and this article refers to them in terms of the types of bar facilities and things like that they provided. Yeah. And it's a fascinating we'll have to post this article because it's an interesting trip down memory lane. But to segue into the rest of our topic today is this article really points out how different that was back then. It really was just for the people who had the bucket loads of money spend on it. And as a I guess to bring it back to us, maybe I think we're in this unique position, I think, with our generation where we saw not just with air travel, with a lot of things where we've seen things go from being incredibly expensive and inaccessible to becoming cheap and accessible. And I think air travel is one of those things. I mean, I used to remember that even a one-way domestic flight between Adelaide and Melbourne, which is not a big deal. It's only a 50-minute flight, used to cost $500. Yeah. And you would think about that and you'd go, mentally, that kind of makes you think, well, going to Melbourne or going to Adelaide all of a sudden becomes, it's got to be pretty damn important if you're going, and who knows how much it was worth. Then $500 is probably like, I don't know, $1 gazillion now or something or whatever. But
that's right. I mean, I remember the days when people used to drive to Melbourne. It's not so common anymore.
Well, I mean, at 30 to 50 cents a litre for petrol, and this is the irony that now it actually could potentially cost you more to drive to Melbourne or drive to Adelaide than fly it, which is amazing, isn't it?
Well, unless you jump in a Tesla, I guess. But yeah, you're
right. And there's another article that spoke to this, even though it was sponsored, but it was. It's just to do with how air travel's become more affordable, and it's got to do with what it's from businesswire.com, and it's got to do with this idea of a flexible pricing model, and the idea that you can have a la carte options when you're buying an air ticket. Although we'll get to the budget part of it in a minute, because that's not all necessarily what it's cracked up to be. But the thing that's interesting in this article is that it talks about the change in the demographics of people that fly, and the interesting one here is the millennial traveller. Young travellers between 18 to 34 years old were the ones that travelled the most regularly in 2015, with an average of 6 trips. Wow. They are more multi-ethnic and are value conscious when spending money on travel, and that's the that's the most regular travels now. Now you can contrast that to what we were just talking about. Yeah. The affluent were the only ones traveling, and that's a big shift.
Oh, it's huge. And I mean, as we all know, whole families travel now. You've got everyone from screaming kids kicking in the back of the seat, right through to far more mature people who are going off on holidays, long holidays. So it's an amazing how that has shaped the whole airline industry and changed, in fact, the whole way that it works, probably in the space of 20 years or so.
Yeah, which is not really a long time if you think about it. And that's why it gives us a unique perspective, because we went through that 20 years in effect. We saw in a little bit of how it was before and how it was fairly inaccessible and whatnot, and then it became accessible for everyone.
Well, that's right. It was a big thing to travel, and I remember probably 20 years ago, or longer than 20 years ago now, when I took my first international flight, the same flight to, say London from Australia now is cheaper today than it was back then. And that's saying a lot. It's quite incredible. Of course, I must say that, in those days you'd fly on an international leg and there'd only be 70% or 80% occupancy. Yeah. Now I think every flight's about 99.
It's jam-packed in there. Just some other types of travellers that they're talking about. You've got the senior traveller that comes up next. They're discovering their love of travel during their retirement years, and it's very the price is right for them. And it's and it can be a stress-free experience given how easy it is to book flights and all that. Then there's the other group that you mentioned, the families taking to the skies more often than ever before.
Yeah.
And then of course the road warrior or the businessman, or business person, I should say, that takes 12 or more trips a year by year. And really the only way that's going to happen, unless there's some sort of extraordinary circumstances, that it's likely to be for business, and that's when you're going to rack up your miles and your points pretty frequently. And they're the people that are more likely to be latching onto the more expensive tickets that give them more flexibility to change around dates and times and options and whatever else.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned all of that as well, because, of course, the other thing that's changed in 20 years is you can book all the flights yourself now, which once upon a time, even for domestic travel, pre-internet, you still had to go and see a travel agent. It was incredible.
Yeah, and travel agents these days are in a lot more precarious position for that reason. But it's interesting that they've been able to reinvent themselves as the ones that can look after the people that aren't sure about how to do it, or they don't feel safe doing it online, or they just can't be bothered, doing it themselves.
They certainly make a lot of money selling travel insurance, that's for sure.
Absolutely. This discussion, we probably need some coverage of the budget airline model, and I think that's by and large driven a lot of this drop in price and the change in the nature of all of this. But there's some pros and cons to all of that. Now, we mentioned the a la carte type style of ordering options as you need them for these flights, but quite often what can happen is that you can get sucked in with an airline advertising a $39 flight, but by the time you add all the optional extras, which actually a couple of them are not optional, like baggage, you'd probably want to get a seat secured, not leaving it as a every person for themselves type thing. You add all these extras in, and then it's it could be $100 or whatever else. That might be a bit extreme, but you get the idea. It suddenly becomes almost equivalent to the price of a regular fare on a more quote unquote expensive airline.
Exactly. Yeah. It's interesting how they've done that. I think there's some policy moves in Australia anyway to remove some of those hidden features, and certainly there are operators who are cheaper than anyone else until you add on the extras as well when you're booking flights. So it's an interesting thing. But, I mean, really, the budget airlines in Europe, which is where I think the real budget airlines started, there's nothing like it, really. I'm sure you've caught those old Ryanair flights or EasyJets, and they're just like you see on the TV show. The hassles of getting on. If you're 2 minutes late, they don't cut you any slack, and it's like it's tough traveling that way.
Well, that's why I couldn't even compare like Jetstar and Tiger that we have here to them. Like I mean, they have some of their strict conditions as well, but the thing that really opened my eyes with the EasyJet thing was all about the no seating beforehand, so you get like what was it? A boarding zone or something. There's like A, B, C, and D, and then like you want to be in A because you want to be able to jump in and grab the first seat that you like and whatnot. So that was really amazing, and of course I think it was based on check-in time, wasn't it? You got the first priority zone if you were there like 12 hours beforehand or something ridiculous like that. So.
Minute flight across the channel.
Exactly. So, and then I hear stories of like Ryanair trialing, and I don't know if I didn't look it up whether they put it into practice or not. The idea of the standing seat, I
love that idea though. I think I'd be more comfortable in most cases in a standing seat than a seated seat. So I'd say bring it on. But it was funny. People didn't like the idea of it. I just thought, why not?
It might work for 40-minute flights or something. I'm not sure if it would work for a 4 or 5 hour flight though.
No, I don't think I'd go the 4 or 5 hour flight, but certainly for a 30 or 40-minute flight for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Steve, we might start to wrap it up here. We might just mention quickly too, first class these days is obviously the price is I know it's out of our price range, but you look at what's available, and they're really outdoing themselves with a lot of these airlines. That
now they have apartments and butlers, even better than first class. And I was telling you before, but you could crowdsource your first class flight if you want. Actually, we probably should run a SciTech culture crowdsource.
Yep, and we can do it for business purposes. We can say we have to record an episode over in the UK, and
well, why not just go as far as Dubai and go in the Burj Khalifa?
Yep, absolutely.
Do an episode there.
Absolutely. All right, Steve, we'll wrap it up there, and we'll We'll have to keep an eye on how all the flight things are going as well, because I've noticed over time that it's still like the industry is dynamic, and you do notice changes. Because we're in positions where we can just fly at the drop of a hat. I'm sure you would have noticed too that they're always doing things to change things up, trying to outdo each other and all that sort of thing. And it's an exciting time for aviation, I guess.
Yeah, it is very exciting time for those of us that get to travel.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so don't forget our website, scitechculture.com. You can get all of our links and content there. You can interact with us on Twitter, Google+, and Facebook, so I'd love to hear from you. And if you think anyone's interested in these regular discussions that Steve and I have on a regular basis, feel free to send them to scitechculture.com. We'd greatly appreciate that. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.